Welcome, everyone, to the latest edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers. Coming up later in the podcast, the Guardians draft Travis Bazzana with the first overall pick in the draft. I'll give you my thoughts on that and the Guardians' struggles at the end of the first half of the season, even though it's not really a half. They've played 95 games, have 67 left. That's coming up a little bit later, but we're going to begin with the Browns, or the Mount Rushmore of the Browns. That's all coming up right here. The Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers.
You're watching Adam the Bull on the BetRivers Network.
Folks, if you're not using the BetRivers app, what are you doing? There's still plenty to bet on. It may be the All-Star week, but you got the Home Run Derby, the game tomorrow, WNBA tennis, and a whole lot more. If you're not doing so already, make sure you are using the BetRivers app. We can't bet on who belongs on the Browns Mount Rushmore. You can't bet on that because it's an opinion. But SI recently, I didn't even know SI still existed. I guess they do online. But SI recently created a Mount Rushmore for every team in the NFL. And the Browns Mount Rushmore includes 3 guys that haven't played in over 50 years. That's because the best era of Browns football was the 50s into the early 60s, unfortunately. And so the Browns Mount Rushmore, according to SI, includes Otto Graham, Jim Brown, of course, Lou the Toe Groza, and the only modern player is Joe Thomas, who, of course, recently got into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We all love Joe. And on any great Browns list, Joe Thomas is going to be a member. And then, we talked about this briefly on UCSS today, started thinking, okay, well, if it's since the 70s, who would you have on the list? And then Ozzie Newsome gets in the mix, of course. Ozzie Hall of Famer. Clay Matthews could get in the mix, of course. And there's a number of other guys. But then I said, okay, well, we have a new Browns era. For the most part, it has not been a good era. Also, one other guy who I didn't mention, of course, in the, since the 70s, of course, Bernie Kosar belongs in the conversation as well. And we continue to wish Bernie the best. I texted with him the other day, and he says he's doing well. So, I don't know. We just got to hope that everything goes smoothly with Bernie. So, wishing him the best still, of course. So, I was thinking about, though, since 1999, obviously the Browns, after having their team stolen, were able to fight to keep the colors, keep the name, keep the history. But it was a new team in 99. There's no doubt about it. The Browns were an expansion team. And obviously, in the 25 some odd years since, things have mostly gone poorly. But we maybe last year started what could be the best stretch of Browns football since at least the 90s. Since at least the late 80s. And hopefully, it'll be even better than that and rival what the Browns were in the 50s into Jim Brown in the early 60s. But since 99, I was thinking, well, who would we put on the Browns Mount Rushmore of players that played since 99? Now, one is obviously easy. That's Joe Thomas. He's on the SI Mount Rushmore. Nothing to disagree about there. Joe Thomas is a Hall of Famer, an all-time great player, an all-time great guy. So Joe Thomas, of course, is going to be the first member of the 1999 to now Browns Mount Rushmore, or top 4 team, whatever you want to call it, if the Mount Rushmore comparison gets a little tired for you. Who else is on the list? Well, in my opinion, the next 2 spots are easy, and they're both guys who are still playing for the Browns. One is my all-time favorite Browns player, and that's Nicholas Jamal Chubb. Nick Chubb is coming back from injury. I don't know if you folks saw it today, but there's a video circulating of him doing some pretty serious squats. We've seen him do some crazy amount of weight in squats before, and he's at it again. What does that mean in terms of his comeback, his ability to cut? I don't know, but it's certainly not a negative that he's able to squat whatever the hell the weight was today, an absurd amount of weight. We know what kind of player Nick Chubb has been. Nick Chubb is all-time, if you look at the all-time yards per attempt, yards per rushing attempt for running backs. The number one I believe I'm double checking it right now, but the Nick Chubb at last check was, I think, second among running backs of all time, and that is correct. The top 5 guys in yards per rush all time are all quarterbacks: Michael Vick, Randall Cunningham, Lamar Jackson. I'm sorry, Marion Motley is in the top 5. Interestingly enough, Marion Motley, who of course spent pretty much all his career playing for the Browns, is fourth all time in yards per carry. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry. But obviously he played 1,000 years ago. Russell Wilson is then 5th. Jamal Charles is 6th at 5 points. He's actually tied with Russell Wilson and second amongst running backs. So Marion Motley's first among running backs at 5.7. Jamal Charles at 5.4. And then Nick Chubb is 3rd at 5.3, ahead of Jim Brown, who is 4th at 5.2. And Mercury Morris is 5th at 5.1. Believe it or not, I don't think a lot of people would guess this, but Aaron Jones, who just signed with, where the hell is Aaron Jones playing now? Oh, the Vikings, that's right. Aaron Jones is actually 10th all time and 6th among running backs, averaging 5 yards per carry. Now, the advantage that Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones have is that they haven't retired yet. So, usually later in your career, those numbers are going to go down. So we'll see how high they can keep them. But Nick Chubb is 7th all time in rushing yards per attempt and 3rd all time in rushing yards per attempt amongst quarterbacks. Pretty impressive. He's ahead of every other active great quarterback: Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, all of them. He, in that statistic, has been fantastic. And he's done it on a team that really has been, at best, in his time here, 2018 through last year, really through 2022 because he didn't play much last year, has been inconsistent at best at throwing the football, mostly with Baker Mayfield, a little bit with Deshaun Watson and some other guys. But he hasn't had a great passing game around him. They have at times. Baker's had his moments, obviously. But for the most part, he hasn't had a great passing game. I would say at best the league average passing game. And yet, this is how effective he has been. This is how dominant he's been to have that statistic. And when you look at a lot of other stats for Nick Chubb, they're all pretty impressive. He, like Joe Thomas, who I mentioned before, by all accounts, is a Hall of Fame person in addition to being a potential Hall of Fame player. I've never heard, I'm sure you've never heard a bad word about Nick Chubb. The guy is everything you want in a professional athlete, an extremely hard worker, extremely talented, extremely motivated, team guy. And so Nick Chubb, to me, is an easy choice. Myles Garrett would be next. And if I were picking, I would have Nick Chubb ahead of Myles Garrett. We were talking about it earlier today, and the consensus was Myles Garrett ahead of Nick Chubb. But the more I thought about it as the afternoon went along, I would have Nick Chubb ahead of Myles Garrett. And then Myles Garrett would certainly be on the list as well. And so he's my 3rd choice for the Mount Rushmore of the Browns since 99. Obviously, he's had a sensational career. The only criticism really that you can have of Myles Garrett is that he has played worse as the season has gone along, or at least he's been less productive as the season has gone along in terms of sacks. And when you look at Myles Garrett, sacks per game, let's see, most career sacks per game by a player with at least 16 games. So, believe it or not, TJ Watt, all-time leader in sacks per game, 0.93. Myles Garrett is 2nd, 0.89. The rest of the top 10 is a who's who of greatness. Reggie White, 3rd, 0.85. Mark Gastineau, 4th, 0.83. Micah Parsons, 0.81 is 5th. Lawrence Taylor, 0.79, 6th. Nick Bosa, 0.79 is 7th. DeMarcus Ware, Dexter Manley, and J.J. Watt round out the top 10. If you look at the all-time sack leaderboard, obviously Myles Garrett is number 1 all-time in Browns history. Myles Garrett is now, where is he now? overall. He is 94th all time with 88.5 sacks through the end of last season. If he gets, let's say, 13 this year, which would be 101.5, he'd go from 94th to 58th with 13. So by 2 more seasons, he is very likely to be as high as 33, 32 even. So obviously, he's had an incredibly successful career. His sacks per game are through the roof. And he's been a great Browns player. He is, if you look at, let's see. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So that was the unofficial leaders, including sacks from guys pre the sack era. I thought it seemed too low that he was in the 90s. He's actually, according to the official statistics, he's 62nd. And if he gets, say, 15 this year, which would put him to 103.5, he would be in 35th place already. So very good chance he'll get in 2 more years. He'll be close to the top 20 of all time. Active players with more sacks than Myles Garrett: Von Miller 123.5, Cam Jordan 117.5, Justin Houston 112, Chandler Jones 112, Calais Campbell 105.5, Khalil Mack 101.5, T.J. Watt 96.5, Jason Pierre-Paul 94.5. So that's your list there. So Myles Garrett's an obvious choice. So now we have Joe Thomas, we have Myles Garrett, we have Nick Chubb. So who is the last choice? Who is the fourth guy that we put on the list of Mount Rushmore for the Browns since '99? There's a few interesting candidates. Braylon Edwards, maybe, had a couple of really good seasons. Kevin Johnson had some success. How about a couple of great special teamers that might? I can't believe I'm going to say special teamers. But yeah, I mean, you look at Josh Cribbs, you look at Phil Dawson. I hate to say it, you don't really want to have a kicker or a return guy as one of your all-time Mount Rushmore, but Josh Cribbs and Phil Dawson both deserve consideration. How about some other guys in the mix? Is there anybody on this current team? Could you put Joel Bitonio in the mix? I think you could. I think you can make an argument for Joel Bitonio. We'll see, especially after he retires. I mean, I think he's been a great offensive lineman. So was Alex Mack. So were Mitchell Schwartz. Those guys didn't play. I'm not enough years in Cleveland, but they were great offensive linemen in this league. But in the end, for the last spot, and again, Kevin Johnson, good candidate. Almost had 2,000-yard seasons. Ozzie Newsome, before Amari Cooper, was the only Browns pass catcher ever with 2,000-yard seasons. Kevin Johnson came close. He had 986 in 99, the expansion year, and they had 1,097 in 2001. What about Josh Gordon? I didn't even mention Josh Gordon. He had an all-time season, one of the greatest seasons in the history of football for a wide receiver. And he could have been great, but obviously that 1 year was not enough. Braylon Edwards in 2007 was an all-pro, a Pro Bowler, had almost 1,300 yards, 16 touchdowns. The year before and after that, he had around 900 yards. But again, he also wasn't in Cleveland long enough, so I leave him off, and I do leave Josh Gordon off. In the end, it came down to 2 players for me for the fourth and final spot. Both guys I've met. One I know a lot better than the other, but I've met them both in person. One is DeQuell Jackson. The other is Joe Haden. I think one of those guys grabbed the final spot of the 99 and beyond Mount Rushmore. And in the end, I had to go with Joe Haden. It pains me a little. I love Joe, but DeQuell's my guy. I mean, when we first started the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, DeQuell was on with us regularly. I love DeQuell. I loved watching him play. He was just fantastic. He's great in the media. Now he's working in the Browns front office. Wish him all the success in the world. I love DeQuell. And it pained me. I wanted to put DeQuell in, but in the end, I had to go with Joe Haden just over DeQuell. They both played 8 years for the Browns. They both played at an extremely high level. DeQuell, as good as he was, and he probably should have never made a Pro Bowl. Now, Pro Bowl's not the end-all, be-all, but he didn't make any in Cleveland. He made one in Indianapolis. He should have made them. Joe Haden made 2 Pro Bowls. He was a second-team All-Pro 1 year. He was listen. You're splitting hairs here. I guess he could have gone either way. In the end, I felt like Joe Haden had a slightly better case. And again, it pains me because I love DeQuell so much. He's such a great guy. I do love Joe also, and I'm going to go with Joe Haden. And then DeQuell's my first guy out is DeQuell. And then after that, if in the 6th spot, I'd probably go with Josh Cribbs. Josh Cribbs, my man. Andy. Was it Andy that loved him? Or Tommy? Tom, I can't remember now who's the Josh Cribbs obsessed. I'm terrible memory now. I think it was Tommy. Who used to call me on the fan all the time and talk about how much he loved Josh Cribbs. Was it Tommy? Yeah, I think it was Tommy. Anyway, there it is. So my final Mount Rushmore since 99, Joe Thomas, Nick Chubb, Myles Garrett, and Joe Haden with DeQuell Jackson just off the list. I'd love to hear your responses to this. So send me an email, send me a tweet, what you think. Should it have been DeQuell? Should it have been Kevin Johnson? Should it have been Braylon? Might it end up being JOK or David Njoku or Joel Bitonio or Denzel Ward? I didn't mention Denzel Ward. I mean, he, could belong in the conversation. Joe here longer at this point. But Denzel coming up on the list, no doubt about it. He would make my top 10, I think. If I had to pick top 10 Browns since 99, I think Denzel's right there. But in the end, I'm going with Joe Haden. All right, let's switch gears and talk some baseball here. Last night, the MLB Draft, I was talking about this with Zach on the Ultimate Guardian show. Talked more about the baseball draft this year than probably the last 12 years combined. The Guardians had the first pick in the draft, and they took a 21-year-old second baseman, originally from Australia, played at Oregon State, same school that Stephen Kwan played. They have a relationship. Travis Bazzana, first second baseman ever taken first overall in the draft. First Australian-born player ever taken first overall in the draft. Hopefully he will become the all-time home run leader from Australia. I think Dave Nielsen of the Brewers had like 100-something home runs. Had a great career in college. One thing that stands out in particular with Travis Bazzana is last year at Oregon State in his final season, this past season, 76 walks and 37 strikeouts. That is absurd. More than double the walks than strikeouts, and we just don't see that ever. Last year in the Cape Cod League, Woodbat League, playing against a lot of great players, he won the MVP, had a 1,037 OPS there, 6 homers, 31 ribbies in 158 plate appearances, 18 walks, 18 Ks. Overall at Oregon State, 180 walks and 146 Ks, but 62 of those 146 Ks, so almost half of them came in his freshman year at 19 at Oregon State. So, prodigious eye, ability to read the strike zone, baseball IQ through the roof, work ethic through the roof. A lot to like about Travis Bazzana. Is it a slam dunk short thing? No. There's no Paul Skeens in this draft. There's no Bryce Harper in this draft. But this guy and a few others were in that tier right below. He has a chance to be a really good major leaguer. I'll be curious to see where they start him. Do they send him to Lake County for a while? I'd like to see him start right in Double-A at Akron. Jake Crawford suggested today that he should be in the big leagues by September. I can't imagine that would happen. If he's fantastic, there's an argument, I guess. I can't imagine the Guardians would ever do that. I would expect him to be in the big leagues no later than next June. Absolute latest. And that's if he's doing well, of course, which hopefully he will translate to professional baseball very quickly. A lot to like about this kid. He'll turn 22 next month and does project as a guy that can, as I said, get to the big leagues pretty quick. Last year we saw Paul Skeens get drafted. He's obviously an all-star starting for the National League. We saw Wyatt Langford get drafted by the Rangers. He's in the big leagues. In fact, he started in the big leagues at the beginning of the season this year. Travis Bazzana could be one of those guys next year. Certainly, I guess anything's possible in September, but unlikely. But certainly next year, if he plays as well as we expect, could be right up in the big leagues. I can't remember if I mentioned or not. He does have a relationship with Stephen Kwan. They know each other. Obviously, both went to Oregon State, didn't play together, different coaching staff, but there is a relationship there. And there's some similarities in their game. Obviously, Bazzana coming in appears to have way more power than Stephen Kwan. He had 28 home runs in 60 games at Oregon State, despite the fact that he walked 76 times. On base percentage this year at Oregon State, .568. That's ludicrous. Hit .407 at a .911 slugging. He had 48 extra base hits in 214 official at-bats. Again, with all those walks, you're not putting the ball in play as much. But for him to have 48 extra base hits, I mean, nearly, just about 22% of his official at-bats were extra base hits, which is, that's just crazy. Over 40% were hits. So this guy's got a lot of potential, and hopefully he'll be in the big league sooner than later. As far as the Guardians in the majors, obviously the last few weeks of the before the break did not go well. They lost another series right before the break, losing 2 out of 3 to Tampa. The hitting in this last week on the road was awful. They do need to add a bat in the next 2 weeks before the trade deadline. They do need to add at least one starting pitcher. But I believe this team is a legit World Series contender. The Yankees have their problems right now. The Orioles have their problems right now. Nobody in the American League is standing out as unbeatable at all. The Phillies look like the best team in baseball. They're in the National League. The Guardians must be all in terms of, as my buddy G. Bush would say, Operation Stockpile. At least one starter, I'd get 2. At least one bat. Let's get crazy and get 2. But minimum, 1 starter, 1 legitimate middle of the lineup hitter. A guy who can bat 2, 3, 4, or 5. It's got to happen. They need it. Now the rest of the team will get a breather here. Obviously, except for the 5 All-Stars. Jose Ramirez in the Derby tonight. He'll be able to bat left-handed as opposed to 2 years ago. He was dealing with a thumb injury and had to bat right-handed in the Derby. I think he's going to do much better tonight. He's not a guy who feels the pressure. And then we'll see what he and the other guys can do in the All-Star game tomorrow. I would think that if the American League's winning, Emmanuel Clase would have the opportunity to close out the game. Now, part of me wants David Fry and Emmanuel Clase in particular not to be at the All-Star game. They deserve it. I hope they succeed if they play. But part of me is like, they could both use a rest right now. David Fry's been in a terrible slump. After the break, remember, I mentioned before, the Guardians have 67 games left on the season, 40 of the 67 at home, where the Guardians have the best record in baseball at 31-11 at home. By far the best record in baseball at home. And like I said, 40 out of 66 at home. 67. 40 out of 67 the rest of the way at home, including a big homestand to start after the All-Star break, starting with the Padres over next weekend, and then the Tigers come to town. Do a little revenge on them. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks, as always, for joining me. Thanks to Monzo for producing. Thanks to all of you for watching and listening. Please, if you're listening via podcast or you're watching via YouTube, subscribe either way or both. I'd appreciate that. Thumbs up, like, whatever you got to do. Talk to you next time. Where else but right here in the bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers. See you, everybody.